Hey everyone, thanks for joining me with another episode of the Horses Advocate podcast. I'm so grateful that you're spending your time here with me. I just wanted to get back on protein for a second in horses. And if you don't mind, this is probably my 1 billionth time, and probably there's like a quadrillion more times I'm going to talk about how important protein is in horses and in humans as well. We keep forgetting that of our body composition, it is basically down to maybe 4 groups, 5. Air, we'll just put air in there. Water, of course. Minerals, and the minerals include sodium and chloride, potassium, phosphorus, iron, zinc, magnesium, manganese, etc. All these different minerals, the macros and micros. But then we're down to the last 3, which is fat, sugar, and protein. And the fats we've gone over, sugars we've gone over. I'll probably do them again, but I just want to focus on protein for just a episode here. The importance of protein can't be underestimated in both you and your horses. Protein is everything. Protein is all your connective tissue. And connective tissue includes not just the things that connect muscles and to bones like tendons and ligaments, but the bones themselves, what houses the calcium in the bones is a connective tissue. The cartilage, articular cartilage, is a connective tissue. The dentin in your teeth is connective tissue. There's other things that are used in protein is used for, such as your immune system, neurotransmitters, enzymes. Enzymes are the chemicals that you make to make processes occur. So in other words, I always tell people that if you wanted to drive it, if you want to go to town, you can either walk or you can take a car, and the car is an enzyme. It makes the process of going from where you are to the town a lot easier. That's what enzymes do. In fact, you probably wouldn't even walk to town because it's too far. Yet a car will take you there pretty instantly. So the car enables that process to occur. And that's what an enzyme is. Your immune system, all the cells that are put together are made up of tons of enzymes and tons of specific proteins that find antigens, let's say, that are on a virus, that will say, okay, we've got a foreign virus in here. Let's mount an immune response. Your immunoglobulins, your memory cells, all of them use proteins. Hormones like insulin are proteins. So proteins are in basically every part of your body doing all sorts of work. And in the past week or so, I've been to several farms where I've been thrilled with some and disappointed in others, in the owners not understanding just how important proteins are. And it's easy to understand because proteins are a little bit more complicated than sugar. Everyone's talking about sugar and low starch, and they understand low starch, even though I say no starch is better than low starch, and half of your starch makes it automatically low starch. In other words, if a grain has, let's say, 1 unit of starch, and you're feeding low starch grain, so it has half a unit of starch, why don't you just feed half of the regular grain? That would be giving you half the starch. Because to make that low starch grain more acceptable to you as a food, they have to fill up the bag, and they fill it up with inactive ingredients or byproducts that are low in starch, but are highly inflammable, causing inflammation. Sorry, it picks up our words sometimes. So those byproducts are fillers. And so you're still feeding a scoop of a low sugar diet, when if you fed only half a scoop of your regular food, that would be half the starch. It's a basic concept of eating half a donut rather than a whole donut. You're only going to get half the sugar if you only eat half the donut. Of course, if you eat no donuts, that's the lowest starch available. So not feeding grain will reduce all the starch that they're consuming there. But I digress. I want to stay on proteins. Proteins are found in some grains to a small bit, in forages, but also in a very poor quality or good quality, but not a high quality protein, and some high quality products that are out there. For instance, pea protein in humans is a source of high quality protein. It's a vegetable source of protein for vegetarians. You don't want to consume whey protein, which is from animal products. Whey protein, of course, is an excellent source of high quality protein in humans. Egg whites are the best, most high quality protein you can get, has everything you need, and is completely absorbed by your system. But horses aren't humans. They don't eat eggs, and they don't eat whey per se, although whey protein is available for them. We're basically stuck with the products that are, what do we call it? Vegetables, plant proteins. So the least expensive and most abundant out there, of course, is soybean meal. And you've heard me expound on how great soybean meal is for giving protein. But there are still some people out there who don't want to feed soybeans in any way, shape, or form to horses because of things that they believe in, usually associated with human health, that are not seen in horses. The fact that some of the soybean out there right now is genetically modified and they have glyphosate added to it further discourages people from grabbing onto it, while they still watch their horse fall to the demise of not having enough protein in their diet. They rather see their horse suffer from low protein than feed them something that so far hasn't shown any negative signs, such as genetic modification or glyphosate added to them. But people still are more concerned about those things than they are about feeding high quality proteins that have all the amino acids they need. So what I decided to do was try to come up with something that might help us overcome that little negativity that people have. And some of the things that I've gotten is just, it's frustrating to see that I'm looking at a magazine while I talk to you, because I'm trying to line up some things that I want to discuss. There were two horses. Well, I should go back. In a previous podcast, I told you about a couple of horses that have had laminitis that seem to be recovering and doing very well by the addition of high quality protein, soybean meal in this case, and the elimination of insulin causing sugar spikes by soaking the hay. So they soak the hay, they get the sugar content down, so they lower their insulin, which allows glucose to get out of the inflammatory stage of these blood cells. And then adding the soybean meal is like adding the materials they need to build back a better connection in the hoof. And these horses now are pain-free, which is just super. It's just wonderful to hear. I can't believe that it would be that easy. But if it's not too bad, if it's not a really bad case of laminitis, you can help these guys by getting rid of the inflammation, adding protein. There's a couple of things that I discovered in a recent journal called Equine Veterinary Education. This is from May 2022. And I'm trying to figure out if this is going to help people who are afraid to feed their horses protein or afraid of the whole process of adding proteins. They've had laminitis cases, and one farm decided that they would start to soak the hay, but they're still not adding the protein, which is so frustrating. It's like building a barn with all the lumber that you need and all the workers you need, but not having any nails to put the lumber together. Another thing was something about gastric ulcer scores. So many horses have gastric ulcers, and I never put the two and two together until I read this study, which is just really cool. It's called The Effect of Porcine, that's pigs for all of you guys who don't know what porcine is, porcine hydrolyzed collagen on gastric ulcer scores, gastric juice pH, gastrin, and amino acid concentrations in horses. I'm very bad at pronouncing people's names, but the lead author is Camacho-Luna. So it's a hyphenated last name. Andrews, Kiwen, Graza, Lou, Lamp, and Oljave. God, I'm horrible with names. I can barely do English, let alone other people's names. This is out of LSU in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And also the Netherlands and Wisconsin. And it's powered by or paid for by somebody who makes this porcine hydrolyzed collagen, which they call PHC. So collagen is a type of protein that I personally have. I add it to my coffee every day. It's high in some amino acids and not high in others. It's a nice balancing act if you like whey protein, because whey is a little bit low in glycine. So I add collagen, which is a little bit higher in glycine. And it's really good for skin, for epithelium. And it makes wrinkled skin a little bit smoother. According to my wife, she says her skin looks great now. And remember, inside the gut is also the continuation of the skin outside. If you don't believe me, you just look at somebody's lips and you'll see the skin of their cheek and chin come up to the mouth, and they suddenly change color at the lips. And then it continues on inside. It lines the whole lining of the gut down to the anus, where it comes back out, becomes skin again. So skin and the epithelium of the gut are very similar. And the lining of the gut really will do well with some collagen. And I think it's brilliant that these people decided to add some porcine hydrolyzed collagen to the diet of some horses to see if it had any results in preventing or healing some gastric ulcers that they had. So let me do some reading here so we can get it as accurately as possible. Okay. I'm going to read the summary. Summaries. The thing about studies is most people just read the summaries, or they read the conclusions. And there's so much that's missed. Please listen to my podcast called The Parachute Study if you don't believe me. But let's go ahead and just read the summary. Gastric ulcers are common in horses. Now, that's the first statement. And apparently it is. Nobody asks why it is or how many or percentages. And your horse may never have gastric ulcers because your horse isn't fed any grain and is retired in a field and eats a lot of grass. But we really don't know why. But the purpose of this study, they say, was to test the effect of porcine hydrolyzed collagen, or PHC, on gastric ulcer scores and gastric juice pH in horses, or how acid it was in the horse. We hypothesized that PHC administration will result in improved gastric lesion scores and act synergistically with omeprazole, that's basically GastroGuard, that's an active ingredient there, to improve treatment efficacy. Interestingly, to improve it, not to replace it. So they took 10 thoroughbred horses. So right then and there, it's one specific breed. So if you don't have a thoroughbred, we aren't too sure if this is going to work in your horse. They only use 10 horses, which is really not much, but it's all cost. I mean, it costs money to get 1,000 horses or 10,000 horses together and get rid of all the variations that could occur between the breeds. So they just took this. So right away, this study isn't that great. So they go ahead and explain what they did. They administered 45 grams of this twice daily, and they were treated for 56 days, which is basically 2 months. They did a scoping of the stomach, And they measured the gastric pH juices on day 0, which is the beginning of the program, then at 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and at the end of the study. Excuse me. So they looked at the non-glandular gastric ulcer number, so just the number of ulcers that are in the non-glandular portion. That's the portion where the ulcers really cause a problem. It's above the margo plicatus. It's what you can see with the endoscope that's above and burned in there. The the glandular portion is supposed to be able to take acid, and that's important. Now, the acid shouldn't be burning that at all. And they also graded the severity in the non-glandular portion. They also looked at the glandular portions as well. And the investigator who gave these scores was blind to the treatment, so that's good. The mean gastric juice pH significantly increased. Oh, let me rephrase this. Okay, by day 56, which is the end of the story, end of the story, right? End of the study. Mean non-glandular number of gastric ulcers was significantly lower in PHC-treated horses compared to controls. Now, if they use 10 horses, they don't really say, I mean, it's in the materials and methods. Did they only look at 5 horses, 5 were controls, and 5? I mean, that's just even worse, but they have a statistical significance between the two, and that's fine. Mean gastric juice pH significantly increased in both groups on day 28, and the pH was significantly higher in the PHC-treated horses. When they say the pH was higher, I assume that the higher the number, the more basic it is. So there's less acid in the stomach. So again, we don't know if that's from the omeprazole. Well, they're all given omeprazole, but this is just that omeprazole plus the collagen. Hang in there with me. This gets really muddy. Serum amino acid concentrations were not significantly different 2 hours after feeding. And hydroxyproline, which is one of the amino acids, was not detected, which is making the assumption that it was not absorbed in the gut. Serum gastrin concentrations did not increase 2 hours after feeding the PHC. PHC fed to horses enhanced the effect of omeprazole on increased gastric juice pH, inhibited gastrin secretions after feeding, resulted in fewer non-glandular ulcers after long-term feeding, 56 days, in stall-confined horses undergoing intermittent feeding. Now, that intermittent feeding is an interesting part of the study, and I'm not too sure how it actually affected it, and I have to dive in a little bit deeper. But I just want to go over their conclusions. Then I'm going to talk about this for just a little bit. Their conclusion: porcine hydrolyzed collagen, 45 grams, mixed with feed twice daily. Feed, of course, was grain in this case, was readily eaten by all horses and did not result in adverse reactions in the horses in the study. The PHC used in this study was associated with fewer non-glandular ulcers after 56 days of treatment in stall-confined horses undergoing omeprazole treatment and feed deprivation. In addition, when PHC was concurrently administered with omeprazole, gastric juice pH significantly increased. However, there was no added treatment benefit on ulcer healing. The improvement of non-glandular ulcer scores appeared to be a local mucosal effect, since serum bioactive amino acids and peptides from the PHC did not significantly increase in serum during the study. However, there was a mild effect on inhibiting serum gastrin concentrations after feeding, which suggests some systemic effects. Thus, supplementation with PHC might be a safe supplement to aid in protection of the non-glandular stomach. It should be noted that PHC is not a pharmaceutical agent and is not meant to be substituted for pharmacological agents in the treatment of equine gastric ulcer syndrome in horses. So what does all that mean? All of you who've been listening to me know that I am constantly looking for causes, getting down to the root cause and trying to get rid of those root causes and not really worrying about treating things. So here we got horses that have gastric ulcers and they're being treated with omeprazole, and they didn't see any real improvement in the ulcers. In other words, the omeprazole didn't really help treat it compared to the controls, but adding the porcine hydrolyzed collagen seemed to reduce further ulcerations. And if you look at protein as healing part of the epithelium, especially collagen protein, which is high in these amino acids that are good for your skin, it just makes sense to me that by adding that protein, you're actually helping the horse with the building materials it needs to repair and to make good. They're also reducing the pH by adding the omeprazole, which is a proton pump inhibitor, which by definition prevents the pumping out of hydrogen atoms, so the pH stays more basic than acidic. But it's more complicated. Ulcers are more complicated than that. Ulcers are due, in humans anyway, to a dysbiosis, which means that the gut bacteria are changing. They're not the normal gut bacteria. These gut bacteria are actually becoming out of balance. I hate that word balance, but it's the best way to describe it. In other words, the inhabitants of the section of bowel called the stomach is specific for the pH of that stomach. And when you change the pH of that, then you're going to change the inhabitants of the bacteria, and those changed bacteria can cause the damage to the lining of the stomach. And from that causes the ulcerations. This is true for the small intestine and large intestine, like the colon and colonic ulcers. And by reestablishing the gut bacteria, you're going to make these horses much more comfortable. It was funny, I was working on a horse yesterday that is anxious. It's the best way to describe this horse. Fussing, worried, constantly fighting, trying to move forward, throwing the head around, didn't want me to be in there, was constantly avoiding me working the horse's mouth for dentistry. And I turned to the guy and said, "So what are you feeding this horse?" And he says, "Well, I'm feeding so-and-so's low starch feed, LS, low starch feed. And I'm also feeding the senior feed." Now, I'll admit this guy doesn't know anything about horses. His daughter got the horse, and now the daughter's gone, and he's basically trying to do the best he can keeping it. But I told him, oh, and the horse had horrible fly bite problems, ventral midline dermatitis, just bumps all over this horse. The horse is miserable. Flies are everywhere. This is South Florida. That's what happens early summer. They're just nonstop, and skin problems abound. And this poor horse is having such difficulty trying to stay comfortable. And he was not knowing what to do. So he's adding more things. And he said, "I'm thinking about adding flax because I heard that's supposed to soothe the skin and make things happier." And I said, "Please trust me. Step one, get rid of everything that you're feeding this horse other than ground plants. We've got to get these inflammatory ingredients out of the system." And he didn't understand that. So I said, well, almost everybody is agreeing that in humans, approximately 90% of our immune system is located in the intestinal tract. In other words, that is where we are constantly being exposed to pathogens, that in our lungs, because outside air and outside food and substances come into our body through these portals, through our lungs, our nostrils, and through our mouth into our digestive system. And we are trying to fight off all these causes of inflammation in our gut. And this is why a lot of people who have gut inflammation also have other health issues. And I said, think of yourself as the commander of your army. And he was former military, so this really related to him. Maybe this won't relate to you, but bear with me. So I said, you've got this battle going on that's in your lining of the gut, and you're throwing everything you got at it. And all of a sudden, fly season comes, and your largest organ in the body, called the skin, is being constantly attacked by these flies who are biting it, infecting the bite, throwing in the saliva that causes an inflammatory response. And your body is trying to fight off this onslaught of disease. And it's doing the best it can, but 90% of the inflammatory response, the immune system that you've got, is being worked hard down in the gut. And there's very little, you can't send troops so much to the skin. I mean, you have troops out there. It's not like you don't have any. You're not immune compromised. You have an immune system going out there, but they're going on a threadbare mission. They don't have the weapons needed to repair and make good on the skin that's the barrier to all these insults. So it's doing the best it can, and it keeps getting all this inflammation. I said, if you stopped all the inflammation in the gut by removing all inflammatory ingredients, that's step number one. Now you're going to free up the immune system to start working in other places. And two, give it the materials it needs. I mean, if you're talking in terms of a battle, you want the weapons, you want the ammunition, you need the communication devices, you need all the things that any good military force needs to be successful in the battle. You don't just send men into battle and they don't have any weapons or any bullets for their weapons. It just doesn't make sense. And I understand if you're a pacifist, I get it. Just bear with me and understand that your immune system is at war 24/7 against all the things, what we call pathogens, that are out there in the real world trying to kill us, trying to eat us up. And it's ongoing. You just can't throw your hands up in the air and say, well, I think we should all just learn to live along and just be fine, because that's just not the way the world works. The world is a vicious place. And it's these bacteria and viruses and fungi that are constantly coming in and trying to kill us. And now we're throwing in these inflammatory ingredients that the horse should never have eaten. And they're causing all this inflammation, and we're just trying to patch things up. So he's going to be removing all inflammatory ingredients. Then he's going to be adding a high quality protein source, in this case, soybean meal. And then he's going to get all amino acids he needs to start building the barriers that we need. So the repair process is going to go on. And this study basically says that by adding porcine collagen is a type of protein, that protein, those amino acids are actually helping the lining of the gut heal. So here's proof, albeit a threadbare study of only 10 horses, the thoroughbreds. It would be great if we had more, but I'm finding horses that are removed from inflammatory ingredients and they add high quality protein, their immune system and their esophageal, or I should say the gastric ulcer syndrome that they have, starts to resolve, because now they have decreased inflammation and they have the proteins needed to repair the epithelium. So think about that skin. I have a horse in my own backyard who had the ventral midline dermatitis, all the bumps, the hives, all the reactions of fly bite sensitivity that you'd want in a horse. And we took that horse off of all inflammatory ingredients and started to replace it with soybean meal. And it took over 2 years. It went through the first summer with the flies, and my wife had to continually bathe the horse with some betadine scrub and dress all the wounds that this horse had. And the horse had things like, summer sores that we get down here. And the next year, that was dramatically reduced. I mean, it was almost non-existent. And this year, its third year, maybe it's its fourth year, going into its fourth summer, We don't even worry about it. I mean, we'll put some fly spray on, but we're not worried about any skin conditions. The skin on this horse is perfect and it's living in the same environment it did 4 years ago. That's what it'll do. It takes a year or two. And I told this man, don't look for results this year. Promise me that you're not going to get disappointed that you do this. And you have to stay on top of it all this year. But next year, it's going to be easier. And the year after that, it's going to be even easier. As the epithelium is built back up to being 100%, they have all the materials to build a better skin. And they have the immune system not working so hard in the gut and is now available for the rest of the body. And I think this study really helps to identify or to underscore the idea that having the right materials will help you work against invasions that are occurring in the body. And the invasions in this case are gastric ulcers, but we also have colonic ulcers. We have skin lesions from fly bites. We have breakdown of connective tissue that show up as drop fetlocks or bowed tendons or kissing spine because of muscle loss in the top line, or, and this is a hypothesis, a protein loss in the dentin that's causing all these tooth fractures that weren't even in the textbooks in the 1980s. And now I see tooth fractures all the time. So while I'll never, ever, ever get the money to do the studies, it just, if I do, it's going to be 10 horses. That's because nobody's got billions of dollars. I wish Elon Musk had an interest in horses because, maybe he would have $1 billion that we could put together to get a research group going that isn't based on selling you a product, but actually trying to do the right thing for horses. That would be wonderful, but that's just not going to happen. So we're stuck with anecdotal evidence of doing what we've got. So if you've got a horse that has gastric ulcers and the horse is on omeprazole, by all means, add some protein to this horse's diet, get rid of the grain, and try and get the digestive tract back in order and see if you can get off the omeprazole. I've got a gal who's been with me 4 years now, or 5 years, who's an admin who had gastric ulcers in horses, and her horse was unable to be ridden and now is competing at the highest level in dressage without ever having to treat this horse for ulcers as it goes to horse shows many states away. So it's shipping, it's competing, and it's doing just great without having all these treatments. It's been on soybean meal for many years now, and the horse is competing without any problems. And that's what we want for all your horses. You want your horse to go out there and be comfortable and reach its potential and be a willing partner. And that's what she's found in her horse. And that's what I've found in other horses that have had laminitis that need this extra boost. I've had horses with Cushing's disease, which is a neurodegenerative disease associated with metabolic syndrome in humans, and now certainly associated with metabolic syndrome in horses. And we're getting these horses back on track. And I think it's wonderful that it's that simple. Get rid of all the excess sugar, get insulin to be reduced, and then make sure you add the extra proteins, the high quality proteins that they need so they can build back things. Just as a side note, I walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So my goal is to aim for about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. And it's ideal body weight. So if you weigh ideally 150 pounds, you should be getting 150 grams of protein in you every day, high quality protein. And I mix it up between whey and collagen. And I also get my proteins from other sources. For me, it's meat. For those of you who don't want to eat meat, or if you're just into fish, that's fine. Get fish. If you just are going to do plants, then find some plant proteins that work. You probably don't want collagen because that's from animal products, which is basically connective tissue that's been completely removed, except for the protein itself. And the proteins, whether it's in a plant or in your animal, proteins are made up of the same amino acids. So that's a choice that you can make. But find some sort of plant protein, but you have to be diligent. You have to be aiming for 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. And a lot of vegetarians have to eat a lot of food to get that up there in a human. This is why horses have that huge belly. That's why horses and other ruminants, to be successful, have to have a large digestive tract relative to their body size. They have to continually be eating so they can get enough proteins in a day to replace their lost proteins that are occurring naturally. Having excess sugar will cause an increased protein loss. I've discussed this in other podcasts, but just know that the more sugar you eat, the more sugar your horse eats, the greater use of insulin to take that sugar and prevent it from causing damage to the blood vessels. If sugar is free in your blood stream, it will cause damage to the blood vessels. And this is why atherosclerosis it's the number one killer of humans, because of the excess sugar that we eat, and it causes damage to the blood vessels. And into that damage goes the cholesterol carrying proteins, LPL, lipopolysaccharides, and the LDH, low density LDLs, low density, what everyone calls bad. It's not even cholesterol, it's a protein. And that carries cholesterol, and it gets stuck in these lesions of the blood vessels. And that causes the plaque formation over time that starts the occlusion of the blood vessels, all from free sugar. It's just all boils down to excess sugar in your blood vessels and not enough insulin to escort it through the blood vessels safely. And then the blood, then your muscles start to shut down because they can't store all that sugar as glycogen. Their storage units are filled up, especially in sedentary people. So now all that sugar has to be taken over to your fat cells and stored in the fat, and the insulin stays at the gate, so to speak, and prevents the fat from coming out. So you keep accumulating body fat as long as insulin's around. As soon as you kick insulin out the door, the body fat will go away. And once that happens, everything starts to normalize again. But you also have to remember that your brain needs sugar. Every cell needs sugar. You don't want to go on a zero sugar diet. That's not the way it works. You need a little bit of sugar, and that sugar powers your brain. And if your brain doesn't get enough sugar because insulin is hoarding it all and putting it into your body fat, then your brain starts to get brain fog and cognitive dysfunctions, and your body is screaming for more sugar. So it breaks down the amino acids or your proteins, it breaks them down and turns them into sugar. This is why the 80-year-olds at the mall are easily pushed over and they fall down. It's a leading cause of death in old people is falling down because they've lost their muscle. So the muscle has to remain to have a place for the glucose to go. And that's just not going to happen as long as you're eating a lot of sugar. So the sugar goes into the horses and they start to lose their top line. That's all pure muscle loss. That's no different than your 80-year-old losing their muscle. And it also breaks down the amino acid, neurotransmitters. So you get Cushing's disease, and it breaks down the connective tissue. So you get broken teeth, or you get drop fetlocks, or you get kissing spine. So let's get these horses back on some protein. It's simple. 1 gram per pound of body weight is ideal. If you're doing a 0.5 gram per pound of body weight, that's perfect. A perfect place to start, I should say. If you're feeding 20 pounds of 10% protein hay to a horse that's out eating some grass inside your paddock and eating this hay, it's going to be getting about 1 pound or 454 grams of protein. If your horse weighs 1,000 to 1,200 pounds, that's under 0.5 gram per pound of body weight. So they're chronically protein deficient. And worse, the protein that you're feeding them doesn't have all the amino acids. So they're definitely missing certain amino acids. If this is foreign to you, there's plenty to read on my website on what a protein is and why it's important to have all the amino acids, a broad spectrum, a variety of amino acids. So if you don't, it's like getting a dictionary, missing a letter. If you're missing a letter in a dictionary, there's a lot of words that will never be written. So make sure you have all the amino acids so you can make all the proteins. And you do that by feeding 1 pound of soybean meal per horse per day. And that'll get most 1,000 to 1,200 pound horses up to the bare minimum that they need. Anyway, I thought this article on porcine hydrolyzed collagen was just really helpful in understanding just how important protein is in making sure that the lining of your horse's gut is solid, and it'll help prevent gastric ulcers from occurring, that and getting a microbiome of the horse in really good shape. So that it's a 1-2 punch. Everything's a 1-2 punch on the horse. Punch one, get rid of all the inflammatory ingredients and causing inflammation in the horse, including the increased consumption of certain things like proteins. And 2, add the proteins to replace what's being lost. And if you want to add a step 3, write everything down. Just get a journal, put a date in it, write everything that you do, and make sure that you continue to write all your observations. And usually what happens is in day 3 or 4, if your horse is non-sweater, it will start sweating. If it has a poor hair coat, by 2 weeks, the horse's hair coat will start to look better. In about 2 to 4 months, you're going to see a brand new hoof coming down. Your farrier is probably going to say to you, hey, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. I've never seen the horse's hooves look better. In about 6 to 12 months, you start to see the top line come back. In about 1 to 2 years, you'll see a top line really come back. You're going to see the skin start to heal up. And certainly by year 3, you're going to have a horse in like running at almost 100%. And that's what we want for our horses, right? And isn't it simple? Just stop feeding grain, start feeding forages. And because you don't have a variety of forages, because your horse is sitting behind a fence and only has 1 or 2 grasses there, 1 or 2 grasses in the hay or legumes, if you want to add alfalfa, it still doesn't have a broad variety of protein. So you have to add that. And the soybean meal is the best way to do it. And if I've got people in Africa doing it, and I've got people in Australia and Italy and Singapore and other places that have gotten back to me saying, hey, I've tried this and it seems to be working. Why not you? Why not just do it? What do you have to lose? It costs almost nothing. It's going to save you money, both in veterinary bills, and it's going to save you money in loss of use of your horse. I mean, you're investing time and money in your horse, and then you can't ride it because it's lame or sick or it's dead. I just had 2 horses suddenly die in the practice. They called me up and said, I need to cancel an appointment. The horse just had a catastrophic colic and it's dead. And I just know that these people are feeding, cookies and carrots and graining their horses, and they just won't listen. But I know you're listening because you're listening to me at the Horses Advocate podcast. And I'm so grateful. Please, if you get a chance, could you just write a review someplace? Not that I need to know it. I'm going to do these whether you like me or not. If you're somebody who disagrees with me, I'd love to hear from you. You can always email me through the website, thehorsesadvocate.com. You can do whatever it takes, but we need to know more about feeding horses. And it's not just feeding horses. We need to learn how to take care of them in all aspects, and how to care for them and how to create a safe barn, how to, get their teeth and hooves taken care of. But it seems like everything that goes on with the horse always falls back to we're not feeding them right. It's just that simple. So thanks for joining me. This is Doc T. I'm going to cut it off now. And I appreciate you being here. Be sure to pass this on to some other people. Share this podcast, share the other podcasts, the whole line of them. And think about becoming a member of the Horses Advocate, because that's where I spend my time, in there talking to people, helping people out with their issues, and really getting a good community together. thehorsesadvocate.com. Thanks, Doc T. Bye.
Hey, everyone. Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's 2 reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.